The wind did not just blow across the high valley of Mercer Creek. It scoured it. It was a living thing with teeth, gnawing at the limestone ridges and stripping the bark from the twisted juniper trees that clung to the slopes. It was late October in the year 1882, and the air already held the metallic taste of coming snow. Eli Mercer sat atop his bay gelding, a horse as sturdy and uncomplaining as the man who rode him. Eli pulled the collar of his sheepskin coat higher against his neck. His gloves were thick leather, stained with oil and earth, his hands resting on the pommel of his saddle as he looked out over the northern fence line. The barbed wire was a thin, rusty stitch holding the gray earth together. He was a man built of heavy angles, broad in the shoulder and weathered in the face. 34 years of life had left lines around his eyes that looked like cracks in dry creek mud. He watched a cluster of 6 heifers huddled in the lee of a rocky outcrop. They were thin. The drought of the previous summer had burned the grass to tinder, and now the early winter frost was locking away what little forage remained. Eli clicked his tongue, and the gelding shifted, picking its way down the slope toward the creek. The water was low, choked with ice at the edges. Eli dismounted to check the wire where a dead cottonwood had fallen near the bank. He worked in silence. He had been working in silence for 3 years. There was a time when this land had felt like a promise. Now, it felt like a creditor waiting to collect. When he finished repairing the brake, he mounted up and turned toward the homestead. The house sat a mile back, sheltered by a stand of windbreak poplars. It was a solid structure, built of squared logs and chinked tight against the weather. But it had the hollow look of a place that had forgotten the sound of laughter. As he rode into the yard, his eyes went automatically to the 2 wooden crosses standing beneath the largest cottonwood tree, separated from the house by a low stone wall. The wood was graying now. The smaller cross, hardly taller than his knee, leaned slightly to the left. The wind was always pushing at it. He did not stop to visit them today. He could not. The shame of what he was about to do sat heavy in his gut, like a stone he had swallowed and could not digest. Inside the house, the silence was absolute. It was a clean house, swept and ordered, but it was the order of a man who had nothing else to distract him. On the rough-hewn table, weighed down by a battered tin coffee mug, sat a stack of papers. They were polite letters from the bank in Denver, and less polite letters from the local feed store. Beside them lay a different letter. The handwriting was looped and feminine, the paper worn soft from being folded and unfolded a dozen times. It was from a Mrs. Hale in St. Louis, a practical match. The letter said, "My niece is of good character and strong constitution. She understands the rigors of the West. She requires a home, and you require a partner." Eli took off his hat, running a hand through hair the color of dried wheat. He had not wanted this. He had sworn, standing over that smaller grave 3 years ago, that he would never open his door to anyone else. Grief was a jealous tenant. It wanted the whole house, but the neighbors had started to talk. They looked at him with pity that was slowly curdling into judgment. A man alone on the range was a vulnerability. A man without kin was a man who would eventually lose his land to the sharks like Harlan Voss, who bought up failing ranches for pennies on the dollar. Eli looked at the debt letters. He looked at the empty stove. He was terrified that the silence was turning him into stone. He could feel it happening, the hardening of his heart, the loss of words, the way he looked at the mountains and saw only obstacles instead of beauty. He needed noise in the house. He needed the sound of boots that were not his own. He needed help, and admitting that was the hardest thing he had ever done. The stagecoach station in the town of Granite Peak was little more than a slat-board platform and a mud-splattered office, but today it felt like the center of the world. The coach arrived in a swirl of alkali dust and the jangle of harness brass, the driver shouting curses at the lead team as he hauled on the brake lever. Eli stood by the wheel of his buckboard wagon, his hat in his hands. He had washed his best shirt and brushed his coat, but he still felt rough and unfinished, like a piece of lumber that had not been sanded down. He watched the coach door open. A salesman in a checkered suit stepped out first, followed by a heavy matron carrying a basket of angry chickens. Then, a pause. A hand in a gray glove gripped the door frame. A woman stepped down. Eli took a breath and stepped forward, expecting the girl described in the early letters. Sarah, young, perhaps 20, with a laugh that misses. Hale had promised would brighten a room. The woman who stood on the platform was not Sarah. She was older, perhaps nearly 30. She was thin, painfully so, her figure hidden beneath a woolen traveling coat that had seen better years. A bonnet shadowed her face, but Eli could see her chin was set in a line of grim determination. She did not look around with curiosity or wonder. Her eyes, dark and sharp, swept the platform, the street, the rooftops, and the shadows between the buildings in a single, rapid motion. It was the look of a soldier checking a perimeter. She spotted him. She did not smile. She adjusted her grip on a small, battered trunk at her feet. Eli walked toward her, the wooden planks thumping under his boots. "Miss Hale?" he asked. His voice sounded rusty to his own ears. She looked up at him. Her face was pale, drawn tight with exhaustion, but her eyes held a steady, cool light. "I am Clara Hale," she said. Her voice was low and cultivated, lacking the nasal twang of the frontier. Sarah could not make the journey. "I am her sister." Eli paused. The letters had never mentioned a sister named Clara. They had never mentioned a substitution. He looked at her, seeing the way her hands gripped her reticule so tightly, the leather strained. She was trembling, a fine, high-frequency vibration like a telegraph wire in the wind, but her posture was rigid. "I see," Eli said slowly. He did not know what else to say. He should have been angry. He should have asked questions. But he looked at the thinness of her wrists and the shadows under her eyes, and he saw a desperation that mirrored his own. "I am Eli Mercer." "Mr. Mercer." She nodded. "I trust the arrangement remains acceptable?" There was a tremor in the word acceptable. A fracture she tried to hide behind good manners. "The arrangement stands," Eli said. He reached for her trunk. "The buckboard is this way." As he lifted the trunk, he noticed it was light, too light. It held everything she owned, and it weighed less than a sack of grain. The ride back to the ranch took 3 hours. They moved through a landscape that dwarfed human concerns. The valley opened up around them, vast and indifferent, the sagebrush stretching away to the violet bruise of the mountains. Clara sat on the bench seat beside him, her spine not touching the backrest. She held herself upright, swaying slightly with the motion of the wagon. She wore gloves, even though the afternoon sun had warmed the air. She kept them on, fastening the buttons at the wrist as if checking a lock. "It is big country," she said after an hour. It was not a compliment. It was an assessment of exposure. "It takes some getting used to," Eli said, keeping his eyes on the mule's ears. "It can feel empty if you aren't born to it." "Empty is quiet," she said. "I do not mind quiet." A pair of coyotes appeared on a ridgeline to their left, trotting parallel to the wagon. They were ragged winter coats, their yellow eyes fixed on the mules. Eli watched them out of the corner of his eye. He reached for the carbine rifle slotted beneath his feet, just a slight movement to check it was there, beside him. Clara flinched. It was a violent, jerking motion, her hands flying up as if to ward off a blow before she caught herself. She forced her hands back into her lap, clenching them together until the knuckles showed white through the gray fabric. Eli paused. He slowly moved his hand away from the rifle and placed it back on the reins. He did not look at her. He did not want to shame her by witnessing her fear. "Just coyotes," he said softly. "They are curious, mostly. They won't come close while we're moving." "I am not afraid of dogs," she said. Her voice was brittle. "No," Eli agreed, though they both knew coyotes were not dogs. "I don't reckon you are." When they arrived at the homestead, the sun was dipping below the peaks, casting long, purple shadows across the yard. The house looked dark and forbidding. Eli helped her down. He offered his hand, and for a second, she stared at it as if it were a foreign object. Then she placed her gloved hand in his. Her touch was light, barely there, and she pulled away the instant her boots touched the dirt. As they walked toward the porch, a rider appeared on the road, a ranch hand from the Double Bar Ranch to the south. He slowed his horse, leaning casually on his saddle horn, a piece of straw clamped between his teeth. He looked from Eli to Clara, his eyes taking a slow, insolent tour of her figure. "Well now," the man drawled, spitting to the side. "See you got your package, Mercer. Didn't know the mail-order catalog carried them quite that seasoned." The insult hung in the air, gross and heavy. Clara's face went completely still. It did not crumple. It closed. It was as if a shutter had been slammed down behind her eyes, locking away any person who lived inside, leaving only a shell. She stared at the ground, her shoulders curving inward. Eli felt a heat rise up the back of his neck, hot and sudden. He turned fully toward the rider. He did not raise his voice. He dropped it, pitching it low and resonant, the sound of a heavy door sliding shut. "You'll keep riding, easy and slow," Eli said. "And if I hear your tongue flapping about my wife in town, I will come find you. And we will not talk." The rider blinked, the smirk faltering. Eli Mercer was known as a quiet man, but quiet men were often the ones you didn't want to push. The hand tipped his hat, muttered something unintelligible, and kicked his horse into a trot, disappearing down the road. Eli turned to Clara. He wanted to apologize for the man's rudeness, for the cruelty of the world he had brought her into. But she was already walking toward the house, her head high, her back rigid. Inside, the house was dim. Eli lit a kerosene lamp on the table, the golden light pushing back the shadows. "The bedroom is through there," Eli said, pointing to the door on the left. "I sleep in the loft. You will have your privacy." Clara looked at the door. "Thank you," she said. She began to unbutton her coat. The heavy wool was stiff with dust. Her fingers fumbled with the top button, slipping on the smooth material. She struggled with it, her frustration evident in the set of her jaw. "Here," Eli said, stepping forward. "Let me help with that." It was a reflex, a courtesy. He reached out, his hand brushing the cuff of her sleeve to steady her arm. Clara gasped. It was a sharp intake of air, like a person surfacing from deep water. Her entire body went rigid, stiffening so hard she vibrated. She did not step back, she froze, rooted to the spot, her eyes going wide and fixing on a point on the wall over his shoulder. Eli stopped. His hand hovered in the air. He felt the tension radiating off her, a wave of cold panic that made no sense for a simple offer of aid. "I apologize," Eli said, his voice gentle. He stepped back, putting 3 feet of distance between them. "I didn't mean to startle you." Clara blinked, the color rushing back into her face in a patchy, feverish flush. She forced a smile that looked like a grimace. No, I am tired. The journey, I'm just clumsy." "You aren't clumsy," Eli said. He watched her. "And you don't have to explain." He turned away, busying himself with the stove, adding wood to the embers to give her a moment to reassemble herself. He felt a profound confusion. He was a large man. Yes, his hands were scarred from wire and work. But he had never made a woman tremble with a touch. It felt like stepping on a hidden trap in the grass, a sudden, violent snap that warned of danger he couldn't see. Dinner was a quiet affair. The wind had risen outside, battering the logs of the cabin, whistling through the eaves. They ate stew and cornbread by the light of the lamp. Clara ate with precise, mechanical movements. She did not look at him. She looked at his hands. Eli was conscious of them, the way he held his spoon, the way he broke the bread. His hands were broad, the knuckles swollen from years of breaking horses and digging post holes. There was grease stained into the creases of his skin that no amount of lye soap could scrub out. To him, they were just tools. To her, she watched them as if measuring their weight, their reach, their potential for damage. "The grave's outside," Clara said suddenly. Her voice cut through the sound of the wind. Eli paused. his spoon halfway to his mouth. He set it down. Yes. Your wife and daughter, Eli said. 3 years ago. Fever. Clara looked toward the dark window, though she could see nothing but her own reflection. Her expression softened, the rigid lines around her mouth easing just a fraction. I am sorry, she said. Loss leaves a hole. It is hard to build over a hole. Yes, Eli said. He felt a strange pull in his chest. It was not just grief. It was the sudden, shocking realization that she understood. She wasn't just reciting a platitude. She spoke the language of wreckage. I will not try to take her place, Clara said, looking back at him. I want you to know that I'm here for safety and work. I will earn my keep. You are my wife, Clara, Eli said. Or you will be, once the circuit preacher comes through next week. You have a place here. You don't have to earn the right to breathe. She looked at him, and for a second, her guard dropped. He saw a naked, terrifying hope in her eyes, followed instantly by a shudder of fear so intense it made him look away. After dinner, as she stood to clear the plates, she stumbled. The hem of her skirt caught on the rough leg of the bench. She put her hand out to catch herself against the table, and a jagged splinter from the edge sliced across her palm. She made a small noise, cradling her hand against her chest. Let me see, Eli said. He was up instantly. He moved to the cupboard and retrieved a clean strip of cotton and a jar of salve. It is nothing, she said, backing away. It is fine. It's dirty wood, Eli said firmly. It'll fester if you don't clean it. Please. He held out his hand. He did not grab her. He waited, slowly, reluctantly. She extended her hand. She had removed her gloves for the meal. Her hand was small, the skin pale and thin, looking impossibly fragile in his callous grip. There was a nasty scratch across the meat of her thumb, welling, bright red blood. Eli worked quickly. He dabbed the salve on the cut, his movements practiced and gentle. He wrapped the cotton strip around her hand, pulling it tight to stop the bleeding. There, he murmured, his head bent over her hand. That should hold. He wanted to reassure her. He wanted to show her that he was solid, that he could fix things. Unconsciously, his grip tightened just a fraction on her fingers, a squeeze of reassurance, an anchor in the storm. Your hands, Clara whispered. Eli looked up. She was staring at his hand encompassing hers. Her face was gray. She was not breathing. Her eyes were wide, the pupils blown black with a terror that had nothing to do with a splinter. Your hands, she said again, her voice shaking so hard the words shattered. That was wrong. It wasn't an accusation. It wasn't anger. It was a statement of fact, a boundary drawn in blood. It was a memory overlaying the present. Eli froze. The words hit him like a physical blow. That was wrong. He realized what he was doing, holding her trapped. His size, his strength, his grip. He released her immediately. He stepped back so fast he nearly knocked over his chair. Shame, hot and acidic, flooded his chest. He had wanted to be her protector, and in the span of a heartbeat, he had become the monster. I hear you, Eli said. His voice was rough, cracking in the middle. He held his hands up, palms open, showing her he held nothing. I hear you, Clara. She stood there, clutching her bandaged hand to her chest, trembling. I will not touch you, Eli said. He looked her in the eye, forcing himself to hold her gaze despite the shame burning him. I will not touch you without you wanting it. Not ever. Do you understand? Clara stared at him. She looked like she wanted to cry, or scream, or run out into the snow. She started, then stopped. She swallowed hard. I am sorry. I am so sorry. Don't, Eli said. Don't apologize for that. She turned and fled. The door to the bedroom slammed shut. The latch clicked. Then, the sound of the heavy iron bolt sliding home. Eli stood alone in the main room. The wind howled outside, battering the walls. He looked at his hands, the hands that had built fences, dug graves, and tried to be gentle. He hated them. The morning broke cold and clear. the sky a piercing blue that hurt the eyes. Eli had slept in the loft, waking before dawn. He made coffee quietly, leaving a cup on the table for Clara, and went out to the barn. He found the tracks near the creek crossing at the south property line. They were fresh, 3 riders, maybe 4. They were not the unshod ponies of the Ute, nor the casual, meandering tracks of a neighbor checking strays. These horses were shod with heavy iron, and they moved in a tight formation. They had stopped on the ridge overlooking the house. The ground churned up where the horses had stamped, waiting, watching. Eli stared at the hoofprints. A cold knot formed in his stomach. He mounted his gelding and rode back to the house. "We need supplies," he told Clara when he went inside. She was sitting at the table, the coffee untouched. She looked as if she hadn't slept. "We're going to town." She didn't argue. She put on her coat and her gloves. The town of Granite Peak was busy. Wagons churned the mud of the main street into a thick paste. Eli tied the team outside the general store and went in, Clara trailing him like a ghost. While Clara looked at bolts of calico she had no intention of buying. Eli moved to the counter. The shopkeeper, a man named Henderson, was leaning over a newspaper. "Morning, Eli," Henderson said. "Hear you got company at the ranch." "I got a wife," Eli corrected him. "Right, wife." Henderson lowered his voice. "You watch yourself, Eli. Deputy Rourke was in here an hour ago. Sour as a green apple." "Rourke?" Eli frowned. The deputy was a man who wore his badge like a license to hunt. "What's he want?" "Looking for a woman," Henderson said. "Says she ran off from a contract back east. Says she's a thief." Henderson paused, looking toward Clara's back. "Says she stole money from her intended." Eli felt the world tilt slightly. "Is that so? And Harlan Voss is in town," Henderson added, wiping the counter. "Buying up paper. He's asking about water rights on Mercer Creek again. Says a man with debt troubles might be looking to sell." Eli's jaw tightened. "My water isn't for sale." He walked over to Clara. She was standing by the notice board near the door. Her face was drained of all blood, leaving her skin the color of old parchment. She was looking at a wanted poster. It was crude, hand-lettered. Information wanted. Runaway. Elizabeth Clara Hale. Sought for theft and breach of contract. Contact Deputy Rourke or Mr. Voss. She wasn't just Clara. She was a fugitive. Clara turned to him. Her eyes were huge, dark holes in her face. She didn't try to lie. She didn't try to explain. "I cannot go back," she whispered. The words were barely breath. "Eli, I cannot go back." It was the first time she had used his first name. "Come on," Eli said. He took her elbow, then remembered, and dropped his hand. "Walk to the wagon. Head high." They drove out of town fast. The silence in the wagon was different now. It wasn't awkward. It was terrified. When they crested the final hill overlooking the Mercer Ranch, Eli pulled the mules to a halt. Down in the valley, 3 riders were approaching the house from the east. They were moving at a purposeful trot. The sun caught the metal on the chest of the lead rider, flashing a star of silver light, a badge. Eli looked at the riders, then at the woman beside him who was trembling so hard her teeth chattered. He looked at his house, his land, the graves of the family he had failed to protect. He reached down and pulled the carbine from beneath his feet. He rested it across his knees. "They're coming," Eli said. He felt the Old West, the real West, not the one in storybooks, but the one of blood and iron and bad men with authority, walking straight toward his door. And for the first time in 3 years, Eli Mercer wasn't just waiting to die. He was getting ready to fight. The 3 riders slowed as they crossed the invisible line where the open range became Eli Mercer's yard. They did not ride with the urgency of a rescue party, but with the heavy, deliberate pacing of ownership. The man in the lead wore a coat of brushed buffalo hide and a hat with a brim wide enough to shadow his eyes, but it could not hide the silver star pinned to his vest. Deputy Rourke was a man who had polished the rough edges of the frontier into a weapon. He was clean-shaven, his jawline sharp, his boots devoid of the usual muck that coated every other man in the territory. Eli stood on the porch, the carbine resting in the crook of his arm. He did not aim it, but he did not lower it. Behind him, in the shadow of the doorway, Clara stood. She was not hiding, but she was vibrating with a tension so acute Eli could feel it through the floorboards. Rourke pulled his horse up 10 feet from the porch steps. The animal blew steam from its nostrils, shifting its weight. The two men behind him, hired guns by the look of their low-slung holsters and bored eyes, fanned out slightly to the left and right. "Morning, Mercer," Rourke said. His voice was smooth, like oil pouring over gravel. He didn't look at Eli. He looked past him, into the dark rectangle of the door. "And good morning to you, Miss Elizabeth." Eli felt the air leave the space behind him. Clara did not make a sound, but he heard the soft scuff of her shoe as she took a half-step back. Elizabeth. It was not the name she had given him. "Her name is Clara," Eli said. His voice was flat. Rourke smiled, a gesture that showed teeth but no warmth. "Is it? That is interesting, because the woman described in the warrant, the woman who stole $400 and a sapphire brooch from the household of Mr. Silas Thorne in St. Louis, and who is in breach of a marriage contract to said gentleman, is named Elizabeth Darrow. I am not a thief." Clara's voice came from the shadows. It was thin, like a wire pulled to the breaking point, but it was audible. Rourke leaned forward on his saddle horn. "Step out here, Elizabeth. Let's have a look at you, mister. Thorne is quite anxious for your return. He was very disappointed when you vanished. He has paid a great deal of money to ensure your safe transport back to his care." "I am not going back," Clara said. She stepped onto the porch. The sunlight hit her face, revealing the pale, taut skin and the dark circles under her eyes. She looked brittle, as if a strong wind would snap her in two, but her chin was lifted. "I left because I had to." "You left because you have a wandering nature and sticky fingers," Rourke said, his tone hardening. He looked at Eli. "You are harboring a fugitive, Mercer. That makes you an accessory. I suggest you step aside and let us collect Mr. Thorne's property." Property. The word hung in the cold air. Eli looked at Rourke. He looked at the two men, whose hands were resting casually near their pistols. He remembered the feeling of Clara's hand trembling in his the night before. The sheer terror that had nothing to do with theft and everything to do with survival. "She is not a wagon," Eli said. "And she is not a head of cattle. You don't collect her." Rourke's eyes narrowed. "I have a warrant. I don't see a judge," Eli said. He shifted his weight, planting his feet wider. He felt like a fence post driven into frozen earth, immovable. "And I don't see any proof. You come onto my land, accuse my wife of being a thief, and expect me to hand her over on your word? Your word doesn't carry that much weight out here." "Rourke." The deputy swung his leg over the saddle and dropped to the ground. His boots crunched on the frost-hardened dirt. He walked up the steps, slow and deliberate, until he was standing on the bottom step, looking up at Eli. He was close enough that Eli could smell the bay rum he used to shave and the stale tobacco on his breath. "You are making a mistake, Eli," Rourke said softly. "A very expensive mistake. Voss is already looking at your water rights. You think you can fight the law and the bank at the same time?" "I think you should take a step back," Eli said. Rourke laughed. A short, sharp bark. He moved suddenly, stepping up to the porch level, invading Eli's space, his chest nearly brushing the barrel of the carbine. It was a test. He wanted Eli to flinch. He wanted Eli to raise the weapon so he would have an excuse to shoot him down. Eli's hands clenched on the wood of the stock. His knuckles turned white. He wanted to strike the man. The violence in him, buried under 3 years of silence, surged up like magma, but he heard Clara's breath hitch behind him. "Your hands! That was wrong!" Eli did not move. He did not strike. He simply held his ground, his eyes locked on Rourke's. "You have no authority to search without a writ signed by a county judge." "I have probable cause," Rourke sneered. He pushed past Eli, his shoulder checking Eli's chest hard. Eli turned, keeping his body between Rourke and Clara. Rourke stepped into the cabin. The two hired men stayed on their horses, watching with dull amusement. Inside, Rourke made a show of looking. He opened the cupboard, knocking the tin of coffee to the floor. He kicked the trunk at the foot of the bed, Clara's small, light trunk. "Where's the money, Elizabeth?" Rourke asked, turning over the mattress in the loft. $400. A lot of coin for a girl who used to scrub floors. "There is no money," Clara said. She was standing by the stove, her arms wrapped around herself. "I took nothing but my own clothes." Rourke walked over to her. He reached out and touched a lock of hair that had escaped her bun. Clara flinched so violently she knocked a ladle off the wall. Eli was there in a second. He moved with a speed for a big man, inserting his large frame between Rourke and Clara. He did not touch the deputy, but he occupied the space so fully that Rourke had to step back. "You've looked," Eli said. "You found nothing. Now get out." Rourke stared at Eli for a long moment, measuring the threat. Then he smiled again. "For now," he said. He tipped his hat to Clara. "I will be back, Elizabeth, and when I come back, I will bring irons. You belong to Mr. Thorne. You signed the paper." He turned and walked out, his spurs chiming. He mounted his horse and looked down at Eli. "She is a liar. Mercer," Rourke called out, "and she is poison. You keep her here, and you will lose everything." They rode off, the sound of their hooves fading into the wind. The silence they left behind was worse than the noise. Eli closed the door and barred it. He turned to find Clara picking up the coffee tin, her hands shaking so badly the beans were spilling onto the floor. "Leave it," Eli said. "I have to clean it," she said, her voice high and tight. "I have to clean it up." "Clara," Eli said. She dropped the tin. It clattered loud in the quiet room. She looked at him, her face twisting. "I have to go. I cannot stay here. They will burn you down to get to me." "You aren't going anywhere," Eli said. He walked over to the table and sat down, heavy with exhaustion. "You do not understand." She stepped toward him, her hands balling into fists at her sides. "That was Deputy Rourke. He works for Thorne. He works for Voss. They are the same thing. They use the law like a whip." "I know who Rourke is," Eli said. "And I don't care." "Why?" she demanded. "Why would you risk your land for a stranger? For a liar?" "Are you a liar?" Eli asked quietly. "Yes," the word tore out of her. "My name is Elizabeth Clara Hale, but I am not the sister. I am the bride, Sarah. Sarah doesn't exist. I wrote those letters. I made her up because I knew no one would take me as I was." And she stood there, breathing hard, waiting for his anger, waiting for him to throw her out. Eli looked at the debt papers still pinned under the mug. "Why did you run, Clara?" She slumped, the energy draining out of her. She pulled a chair out and sat, keeping a distance from him. She looked at her hands, the hands that Rourke had said were sticky with theft. "My stepfather," she began, her voice low. "He was a man who believed everything had a price. When my mother died, he decided I was too expensive to keep. He owed money to Silas Thorne. He is a collector. He collects land, horses, and things he thinks are pretty." She looked up at Eli, her eyes dry and burning. "My stepfather sold my contract to him. It was legal, a marriage arrangement to settle a debt. Thorne is 60 years old. He likes to break things. I saw what he did to his horses." Eli felt a cold sickness in his gut. "I said no," Clara whispered. "I said no." And my stepfather laughed. He said no was a word for people who owned their own shoes. "He locked me in the cellar until I signed." She took a breath that shuddered in her chest. "So I signed. And then I took $4 from the kitchen jar, not 400. And I ran. I ran until I found the stagecoach. I wrote to you because you sounded far away." Eli looked at her. He saw the bruises on her soul, the way she had been bartered and sold like livestock. He understood now why his touch, why any man's touch, felt like a cage closing. "I failed them," Eli said suddenly. Clara blinked, confused by the shift. Eli looked toward the window, toward the cottonwoods. "My wife, Mary," and the baby. It wasn't just fever. It was a hard winter, and we ran low on wood, and the roof leaked. I was too proud to ask for help. I thought I could hold it all together with just my own 2 hands. He opened his hands, staring at the calluses. I thought I was strong enough to protect them, but the cold doesn't care how strong you are. I watched the life go out of them. Clara, because I was too stubborn to admit I was drowning. He looked back at her. I promised myself I would never fail anyone like that again. I am not keeping you here to collect you. I am keeping you here because you are a person. And I will be damned if I let them drag you back to be broken. Clara stared at him. A tear finally escaped, tracking through the dust on her cheek. She did not wipe it away. 2 days later, they went to town. They had to. The flour barrel was empty, and the coffee was gone. The atmosphere in Granite Peak had curdled. When Eli pulled the wagon up to the hitching post, conversation on the boardwalk stopped. Men leaned against the posts, chewing tobacco and watching with eyes that were too bold. Eli helped Clara down. She wore her best dress, the gray wool brushed clean, but she held her head low. They walked into the mercantile. The bell above the door chimed, a cheerful sound that died instantly in the heavy silence of the room. Henderson was behind the counter. He didn't look up as they approached. "We need 50 pounds of flour, Henderson," Eli said, "and a sack of beans." Henderson kept wiping the counter. "Can't help you, Eli." "You're out of flour?" "I'm out of flour for you," Henderson said. He finally looked up, his face red with embarrassment and fear. "Voss owns the mortgage on this building. Eli, he sent word. Anyone who trades with the thief gets called in." "I am not a thief," Clara said. Her voice was steady, though her hands were gripping her reticule so hard the leather groaned. "Doesn't matter what you are, ma'am," Henderson muttered. "Matters what powerful men say you are." Eli felt the anger rising again, hot and sharp. He placed his hands flat on the counter. "This is wrong. Henderson, you know me. You've known me 10 years. I got a family." "Eli," Henderson said, pleading, "please, just go." They left the store. The shame burned Eli's face. As they stepped onto the boardwalk, a woman in a high-collared dress, the preacher's wife, Mrs. Gable, swept past them. She pulled her skirts aside as she passed Clara, as if avoiding a puddle of filth. "Fallen women bring trouble to decent places." "Mrs." Gable said to the air, loud enough for half the street to hear. "It is a stain on the town." Clara stopped. She went rigid. For a moment, Eli thought she would break. He stepped closer to her, ready to shield her, to yell, to do something violent and useless. But Clara simply swallowed. She swallowed the humiliation like it was bitter medicine she had to take to survive. She lifted her chin, just an inch, and kept walking. "We need to go to Mrs. Kit," Eli said quietly. "She keeps her own chickens. She might sell us eggs and meal." Mrs. Kit lived on the edge of town in a small, weathered house surrounded by a riot of vegetable gardens. She was a widow of 20 years, a woman made of gristle and sharp humor who smoked a pipe and didn't care for the town's gossip. She opened the door before they knocked. She looked at Eli, then at Clara. "Well," Mrs. Kit said, taking the pipe from her mouth, "you two look like you've been dragged through a knothole backwards. Come in." She did not ask for money. She sat them down and put a pot of tea on the stove. She looked at Clara, really looked at her, with eyes that had seen everything the West could do to a woman. "They're hissing like geese in town," Mrs. Kit said. "Saying you're a desperado. My dear, I expected someone with a knife in her teeth." "I only have a very small knife," Clara said. It was a joke, a tiny, fragile thing. But Mrs. Kit laughed. "Good. You keep it sharp." Mrs. Kit poured the tea. "You can help me with the laundry today. My arthritis is acting up in this damp. I'll trade you flour and eggs for the labor." It was an excuse to give them dignity, and they all knew it. While Eli chopped wood in the yard, Clara stood over the wash basin with Mrs. Kit. The steam rose around them, smelling of lye soap. "Men like Rourke," Mrs. Kit said quietly, scrubbing a shirt. They are like wolves. They test for weakness. If you run, they chase. If you stand, they circle. I am tired of running, Clara said. Good, Mrs. Kit said. But Eli, he's a good man. But he's a man. He wants to fix things with his hands. He wants to build a wall, but you can't build a wall against a lie. She looked at Clara. He needs to listen, and you need to tell him the truth, even the ugly parts. That's the only shield you got. Clara looked down at the soapy water. The kindness was too much. The tears came then, silent and hot. She didn't sob. She just let them fall into the washwater, crying without making a sound so that Eli, outside the window, wouldn't hear and feel he had to come save her. The days that followed were a study in restraint. Winter was closing its fist around the valley. The wind screamed around the eaves of the cabin, driving snow into the cracks. They were trapped together in the small space, Eli mending tack by the fire, Clara sewing patches onto his shirts. The tension between them was a physical thing. It wasn't just fear anymore. It was an awareness. Eli would look up and catch the firelight playing on the curve of her neck. Clara would watch him lift the heavy cast-iron skillet with one hand, the muscles in his forearm shifting. They wanted comfort. They were two lonely people in a cold world, and the instinct to reach out was a constant ache. But the memory of her panic, your hands, that was wrong, stood between them like a sheet of glass. One afternoon, they were in the barn. The air was thick with the smell of hay and horses. Clara was forking hay into the manger while Eli checked the hoof of the bay gelding. Clara turned to leave the stall, and her skirt snagged on a rusty nail protruding from the post. She tugged, but the fabric held fast. She twisted, trying to free herself, but she was stuck. "Hold on," Eli said. He straightened up. He walked over to her. He was big in the small space of the stall. Clara froze, her back to the post, her breathing hitching. The memory of being cornered, of men who didn't ask, flashed in her eyes. Eli stopped 3 feet away. He put his hands behind his back. "You're caught," he said softly. "On the nail. May I help you free it?" He waited. He did not move closer. He let the silence stretch, giving her the power to close the distance or keep it. Clara looked at him. She saw his hands clasped behind him, deliberately removing the threat. She saw his eyes, which held no demand, only a question. She took a deep breath. "Yes," she whispered. "Please." Eli moved slowly. He knelt. He did not touch her leg. He reached past her, his fingers deft and careful, working the wool fabric loose from the rusted iron. His knuckles brushed against the fabric of her skirt, inches from her ankle. The heat of him was palpable. "There," he said. He stood up. He was close now, very close. Clara looked up at him. She didn't pull away. The air between them seemed to hum. She had the sudden, terrifying urge to lean forward, to rest her forehead against his chest, to let his strength be something that held her up instead of held her down. Eli's eyes darkened, a flash of longing he couldn't hide. He started to raise a hand, then stopped, remembering his promise. "Thank you," Clara said, her voice trembling. "You're welcome," Eli said. His voice was rough. They stood there for a beat too long, the moment hanging suspended, charged with a desire that frightened them both because it felt like hope. Then the gelding stamped its foot, and the spell broke. The escalation began 2 nights later. It started with rumors. Eli saw riders on the ridge line, always watching. When he rode the fence line, he found the wire cut in 3 places. Then came the rock. They were eating dinner when the glass of the front window exploded inward. A stone the size of a fist crashed onto the table, sending shards of glass into the stew. Clara screamed, dropping to the floor, covering her head. Eli grabbed the carbine and kicked the door open, rushing out into the dark. "Who's there?" he roared. There was only the sound of galloping hooves fading into the night. Eli went back inside. The wind was pouring through the broken window, freezing the room. He picked up the stone. It was wrapped in a piece of paper. He unfolded it. The handwriting was jagged. "Turn her over or we burn you out. She is a whore and a thief. Last warning." Eli looked at Clara. She was huddled in the corner near the stove, shaking so hard she couldn't hold the cup of water he tried to give her. Her teeth were chattering, a sound of pure animal terror. "They know we are here." Clara wept. "They will kill you. Eli, they will kill you to get to me." "No," Eli said. He crushed the note in his fist. "Pack your things, the warm things, and the food. Where are we going?" "The line shack," Eli said. "Up near the creek headwaters. It's hidden in the timber. It's defensible. And it's stone." The move was brutal. They left under the cover of a snowstorm, the wagon slipping on the icy track. The line shack was a small, grim structure built of river rock, intended for sheltering cowboys during the roundup. It had a small stove, one bunk, and walls 2 feet thick. It was a refuge, but it was also a prison. The space was tiny. They were forced into an intimacy that was no longer optional. They slept in shifts, one watching the door while the other rested on the narrow bunk. The wind howled around the stone corners, sounding like voices. The isolation acted like a pressure cooker. Every fear, every desire, every unspoken word was magnified in the small, dim room. Clara watched Eli clean his gun. Eli watched Clara braid her hair. The closeness was suffocating and essential. 3 days passed. The storm broke on the 4th morning. Eli went out to chop wood for the stove. He looked down the valley, toward the town. The air was clear, the snow blindingly white, and against that white, a dark stain was moving. A group of riders. Not 3 this time. 12, maybe 15. They weren't moving in a column like soldiers. They were a mass, a swarm, a posse, but there was no order to them. This wasn't the law coming to serve a paper. This was a crowd coming to break something. Eli dropped the axe. He turned back to the stone shack where Clara was waiting. He realized then that the time for hiding was over. He wasn't just fighting Rourke anymore. He was fighting the mob, the collective anger of men who believed they had the right to take what they wanted. He opened the door. "Clara," he said, his voice steady. "Load the other rifle." He faced something terrifying, not ghosts or monsters, but the righteous fury of his neighbors, twisted by a lie, riding to bring justice to a man who had dared to stand in the way. The blizzard did what the law could not. It stopped the men, the posse that had gathered on the ridge, a dark knot of anger and bad intentions, dissolved into the white wall of the storm before they could descend. The wind came screaming down from the granite peaks, driving snow so hard it felt like buckshot against the skin, and the world shrank to the 4 stone walls of the line shack. For 3 weeks, there was no sun. There was only the gray light of day and the black weight of night, and the wind that never stopped hunting for a crack in the chinking. Eli and Clara lived in a space no larger than a horse stall. The intimacy was forced, brutal, and necessary. To survive, they had to move around each other with the precision of gears in a watch. If Eli stood to stir the beans on the pot-bellied stove, Clara had to shift on the bench to give him room. If Clara needed to wash, Eli had to turn his back and stare at the frosted window, deaf to the rustle of fabric but acutely aware of the person breathing just feet away. They rationed everything. The woodpile outside was buried under 5 feet of drift, requiring Eli to tunnel out every morning to drag in frozen logs. The food was simple: dried beef, beans, and flour made into heavy biscuits. They melted snow for water, the bucket hissing on the stovetop, filling the room with humid warmth that smelled of wet wool and pine smoke. The silence of the high country was usually a comfort to Eli. Now, it was a heavy blanket that magnified every sound. He heard the scratch of Clara's needle as she mended his second shirt. He heard the way her breath hitched when the wind slammed a particularly heavy gust against the door. He heard her stomach rumble, and the quiet, polite way she tried to hide it. But the nights were the hardest. The shack had 1 bunk built into the wall. Eli had given it to her, taking the floor with his bedroll and a buffalo hide. A heavy canvas tarp hung from a rafter, dividing the room in 2, a flimsy barrier of privacy that did nothing to stop sound. On the 4th night, The nightmares began. Eli woke to a sound that made his blood run cold, a low, strangled whimper that escalated quickly into gasping sobs. It was the sound of someone fighting for air in a room with no oxygen. "No," Clara murmured from behind the canvas. "Please, the door. It is locked. I locked it." Eli sat up in the darkness. The fire had burned down to embers, casting a dull red glow on the floorboards. He could hear her thrashing on the narrow bunk, the straw mattress rustling violently. "Clara," he said softly. She did not wake. She let out a sharp cry, a sound of pure, distilled terror. Eli stood. He moved to the canvas partition. His hand hovered over the fabric. Every instinct in him, the husband instinct, the protector instinct, screamed at him to tear it aside and shake her awake, to hold her until the fear passed. But he remembered her face in the kitchen. "Your hands, that was wrong." He dropped his hand. He did not cross the line. Instead, he sat down on the floor, his back pressed against the wall right beside the opening of the curtain. He sat close enough that if she reached out, she would find him, but he did not intrude. "You are safe," Eli said into the dark. His voice was a low rumble, steady as the earth. "The door is barred. The fire is warm. You are in the high country. Clara, there is no one here but us." The thrashing slowed. The gasps turned into uneven breaths. "Eli?" Her voice was small, thick with sleep and tears. "I am here," he said. "Just outside. I am not coming in." There was a long silence. Then the rustle of the blanket as she curled up again. "Thank you," she whispered. The next morning, the shame hung over her like smoke. She moved around the small space with her head down, avoiding his eyes as she poured the coffee. Her hands trembled as she handed him the tin cup. "I am sorry," she said, staring at the steam rising from the cup. "I am being difficult. You need your sleep, and I am broken machinery, a burden." Eli took the cup. He set it down on the table with a deliberate clink. "Look at me. Clara." She hesitated, then raised her eyes. They were rimmed with red. "You are not a machine," Eli said. "And you are not broken. You are wounded. If a horse gets cut on wire, we don't blame the horse for bleeding. What happened to you? That was wrong. The men who did that to you put the burden on your shoulders. But it does not belong there." He leaned forward slightly, his face serious. "Your boundaries are not a burden to me. They are the fence line. I respect a fence line. You scream all you need to. I will be right outside." Clara watched him, her expression searching. She was waiting for the condition, the price of his patience. When she saw none, her shoulders dropped an inch. She picked up her cup and drank, and for the first time in days, the coffee tasted like warmth instead of survival. As the weeks ground on, the bond between them grew not through grand gestures, but through the small, quiet friction of living. It was Eli leaving the extra wool blanket on her chair when the temperature dropped to 20 below, without saying a word. It was Clara taking his torn work gloves and stitching the leather with a double crossover stitch so strong it would outlast the hide itself. They learned each other's silences. Eli learned that when Clara went still and stared at the door, she was remembering, and he needed to make a noise, drop a piece of wood, clear his throat, to bring her back to the present. Clara learned that when Eli rubbed his left knee, the old brake from a Mustang wreck was aching, and she would silently shift the wood chores to herself for the afternoon. The first touch happened on a Tuesday, or what they reckoned was a Tuesday. Eli had been out checking the trap line he had set for rabbits. The wind had turned, bringing a wet, freezing sleet that coated everything in ice. He came stumbling through the door, his eyebrows frosted white, his coat stiff as a board. His hands were so cold he couldn't undo the buttons. He stood by the stove, shaking, trying to get his fingers to work. "Let me," Clara said. She stepped in front of him. She did not ask. She reached out and began to work the frozen buttons of his coat. Her head was bent, her focus absolute. Eli stood frozen, not from the cold, but from the proximity. She was inches away, He could smell the scent of her, lye soap and something inherently hers, like dried lavender. He held his breath, terrified that if he moved, he would startle her. She undid the last button and pushed the heavy coat off his shoulders. It fell to the floor with a thud. Then, she didn't step back. She looked at his forearm, where the sleeve of his flannel shirt was soaked through with icy water, without looking at his face. She placed her hand on his arm. Her palm was warm. Her fingers were trembling slightly, a fine vibration against his skin. She stood there, her hand resting on his arm, testing the weight of the contact. She was proving something to herself. Eli looked down at her hand. He wanted to cover it with his own. He wanted to pull her into the heat of his body. The desire hit him so hard it was an ache in his chest, a physical pain. It wasn't just a want for friction. It was a desperate hunger to be held. He did not move. He let her choose the moment. "You are freezing," she whispered. "I am warming up," Eli said, his voice ragged. She squeezed his arm, just once, a pressure that said, "I am here, and I am staying." And then she stepped back. The space between them felt charged, the air vibrating with the heat they hadn't shared. That night, the awareness was unbearable. They sat by the stove, the lantern light flickering. "I am afraid," Clara said into the quiet. She was looking at her hands. "My mind knows you are safe, Eli, but my body, sometimes it reacts like a trapped animal. It remembers things I want to forget." "I know," Eli said. He was cleaning his rifle, the rhythmic slide of the cloth soothing. "I'm afraid too." She looked at him, surprised. "Of what? You are the strongest man I have ever known." "I'm afraid of wanting you," Eli admitted. He put the rifle down. "I am a big man, Clara. I have lived a life of heavy work. I am afraid that my want is too heavy, that I will reach for you and crush what you are trying to build back up. I would rather cut off my own hand than make you feel cornered again." Clara looked at him for a long time. "It is a strange thing," she said softly, "to fear your own gentleness." "It is not the gentleness I fear," Eli said. He looked at her, his eyes dark and honest. "It is the hunger." The honesty of it hung between them, stark and terrifying. But it cleared the air. It was a truth they could both see, and because they could see it, they could navigate around it. The weather broke 2 days later, but the danger did not pass. It shifted. The creek had frozen over, a ribbon of white winding through the valley. Eli was outside, chopping wood. When he heard the crack, it was the sound of a gunshot, sharp and loud. He turned to see one of the few cows they had brought near the cabin, a roan heifer heavy with calf, struggling on the ice. She had wandered out too far. As he watched, the ice gave way beneath her hindquarters. She bellowed, thrashing, and dropped into the black water. "No!" Eli shouted. He grabbed a coil of rope from the porch and ran. "Eli!" Clara screamed from the doorway. He didn't stop. That cow represented milk, meat, and future profit. It was life. He skidded onto the ice, moving carefully but quickly. The cow was panicking, her head going under, her hooves scrabbling uselessly against the jagged edge of the hole. The ice groaned under Eli's boots. He made a loop in the rope. He had to get close, too close. He belly-crawled the last 10 feet, the cold seeping through his clothes instantly. The cow thrashed, sending a spray of freezing water over him. He lunged, throwing the loop over her head. He tightened it, then scrambled backward, his boots slipping. "Pull!" He gritted his teeth, digging his heels in. He heaved. The ice cracked under him. For a second, he thought he was going in. The black water surged up over the lip of the ice, soaking his legs. Then, the cow found purchase. With a heave that strained every muscle in Eli's back, she scrambled up onto the solid ice, shivering and blowing snot. Eli lay on his back, gasping, the sky spinning above him. He was soaked, freezing, but alive. He heard running footsteps. Clara slid to a stop beside him. She didn't look relieved. She looked furious. "You stupid man!" she yelled. She grabbed his coat and hauled him into a sitting position. Her face was white, her eyes blazing. "You stupid, stubborn man! For a cow? You would die for a cow? It is a good cow, Eli chattered, his teeth clicking together. I do not care about the cow, Clara shouted. She was shaking him now. Do not do that. Do not you dare leave me here alone. Do not you dare make me dig another grave in this frozen ground. She was crying now, angry, hot tears. Eli looked at her. He realized then that her anger wasn't about the cow. It was about the terror of loss. She had attached herself to him, against all her better judgment, and now the thought of him dying was a threat she couldn't handle. I am not dying, Eli said. He reached out and took her hand. It was the first time he had initiated touch in weeks. Clara, I am not going anywhere. She gripped his hand so hard her nails dug into his skin. Get up, she hissed. Get inside before you freeze, you fool. Inside, while he stripped off his wet clothes and wrapped himself in blankets by the stove, the adrenaline faded, leaving a raw, open space between them. Clara stood by the window, looking out at the white world. It wasn't just the money, she said. Eli stopped toweling his hair. What? Rourke, she said. She turned to face him. He didn't just want the money I supposedly stole. The debt my stepfather owed. Rourke bought it. He told my stepfather he would forgive the interest if he could have me. Eli went still. The water dripped from his hair onto the floor. He said I needed protection, Clara said, her voice shaking with disgust. He said a woman like me, without family, without means, I would not last long. He offered his house, his name, but the way he looked at me, it was the way a man looks at a horse he intends to break. He wanted to own me. Eli, legally, thoroughly. That is why he is so angry, Eli said. The pieces fell into place. Rourke wasn't chasing a thief. He was chasing a possession that had dared to steal itself back. Yes, Clara said. His pride is wounded, and a man like that, he will burn the world to bandage his pride. Then we stop him, Eli said. Not by hiding, by proving it. How? We find the paper, Eli said. You said there was a clerk, the one who recorded the debt transfer. Mr. Dobbins, Clara said. But he left St. Louis. He moved west. My aunt said he was in Silver Creek. Silver Creek is 3 days' ride, Eli said. When the snow clears, we go. The snow cleared a week later. They left the line shack, the isolation having forged them into something harder and stronger than they had been before. They didn't go back to the ranch house. They rode south, skirting the town of Granite Peak, heading for Silver Creek. The journey was brutal. The horses struggled in the drifts, and the wind was a constant, knife-edged companion. But they had a purpose. When they reached Silver Creek, it was a boomtown of mud and raw lumber, smelling of coal smoke and unwashed men. They found the boarding house where they had heard Arthur Dobbins might be staying. It was a respectable place, with lace curtains and a sign that said, "No liquor, no loud language." Eli walked up to the desk. Clara standing in his shadow. The landlady, a woman with eyes like flint chips, looked at Eli, then at Clara. She saw Clara's travel-stained hem, her worn coat, and the weary, guarded look in her eyes. "Room for two?" Eli asked. "I have a room," the woman said. She looked Clara up and down. "But I run a clean house. I don't take in strays or women who travel without a ring." "She is my wife," Eli said, his voice dropping to that dangerous timbre. "I don't see a ring," the woman said. "And I heard talk from Granite Peak about a woman running from the law. We don't want trouble here." She turned her back. Eli stood there, the anger vibrating in his chest. He wanted to shout. He wanted to tear the sign down, but Clara put a hand on his arm. "Eli," she said softly, "don't. It is not worth it." They slept in the livery stable. The owner, an old man who cared more about horses than gossip, took Eli's coin and pointed to the loft. "It's warm enough up there," the man grunted. "Don't smoke." The loft was filled with sweet hay. It was dark, warm, and smelled of dried clover and horses. It was a shelter, but it was also a reminder of their status. They were outcasts. Eli spread the blankets on the hay. He was angry. He sat down, staring at the dust motes dancing in the shaft of moonlight coming through the hay door. "I should have made her give us a room," Eli said. I should have. You should have what? Clara asked. She sat beside him. She took her bonnet off, shaking her hair loose. Fought her? She is just afraid. Eli, fear makes people cruel. It isn't right, Eli said. You sleeping in a barn. I was born in a room not much better than this, Clara said. She looked around. I like the smell. It is honest. She turned to him. The moonlight caught the curve of her cheekbone, the hollow of her throat. She looked tired, but she also looked beautiful, in a way that had nothing to do with prettiness and everything to do with endurance. Eli looked at her. The anger drained out of him, replaced by the ache, the hunger he had confessed to. Clara saw it. She didn't look away. Eli, she whispered. She moved first. She leaned forward, bridging the gap between them. She placed her hands on his face, her palms cool against his heated skin. Eli stopped breathing. He held himself perfectly still, letting her set the pace. She kissed him. It was hesitant at first, a question asked in the dark. Is this safe? Is this real? Her lips were dry, chapped from the wind. Eli responded slowly. He tilted his head, deepening the contact, but keeping his hands on his knees. He wanted to show her that he could be close without taking. Then, the hesitation broke. Clara made a small sound in her throat, a sound of need, and pressed closer. The kiss deepened, becoming desperate. It was the release of months of fear, months of cold, months of wanting to be known. Eli's hands came up, finding her waist. He pulled her against him. The heat of their bodies was sudden and overwhelming. Clara gasped against his mouth. Her hands gripped his shoulders. For a moment, they were just a man and a woman, alive and burning in the center of a frozen world. Then, Clara stiffened. A memory flashed, a hand too tight, a breath too close. I need to breathe, she whispered, pulling back sharply. Her chest was heaving. I need space. Eli stopped instantly. He did not tighten his grip. He did not try to soothe her with words. He simply let go of her waist and moved his hands to cup her face, his thumbs resting lightly on her cheekbones. He held her there, inches away, creating a frame of safety. I am here, Eli said. I am not moving. You breathe. He waited. He watched her eyes dart around the loft, checking for exits, checking for threats, before settling back on his face. He saw the panic crest and break against the wall of his stillness. Clara took a shuddering breath, then another. She looked at him, this big, rough man who could have crushed her, but who held her like she was made of glass. I am okay, she said. We can stop. Eli said. We can sleep. No, Clara said. I don't want to stop being close. I want to choose it. She moved forward again. She didn't kiss him. She pressed her forehead against his. She brought her knees up and curled into him, tucking her head under his chin. Hold me, she said. Just hold me, hard, so I know I am not falling. Eli wrapped his arms around her. He held her firmly, a solid cage of bone and muscle that was designed to keep the world out. Not to keep her in. They lay there in the hay, fully clothed, hearts beating against each other. Clara began to cry, soft, releasing tears. She wasn't crying from sadness. She was crying with the sheer, exhausting relief of being held by a man who listened. The next day, they found Mr. Dobbins. He was older, grayer, and terrified of Rourke. But he was a man who feared God more. He gave them a sworn affidavit. He had the ledger that proved the debt was a sham, a vehicle for extortion. It won't be enough to jail him, Dobbins warned, handing over the papers. But it will be enough to get a judge to pause. It proves malice. It was a weapon. It was hope. They rode back to Granite Peak with the documents tucked inside Eli's coat, right next to his heart. The weather held, and they made good time. They felt lighter. They had a plan. They had a truth that could stand up in the light. But the West had a way of punishing hope. They arrived at the Mercer Ranch at sunset. The house stood silent, the windows dark. Eli rode up to the porch and dismounted. He reached for the door latch. There was a piece of paper nailed to the wood at eye level. It was heavy, official stock, flapping in the wind. Notice of foreclosure and reassignment of water rights, by order of the county land office. Due to unpaid debts and uncertain title, the property known as Mercer Creek is hereby subject to seizure. Water rights are temporarily reassigned to the Voss Cattle Company for survey and management. Eli read it twice. The words swam before his eyes. Unpaid debts. He had missed 2 payments. Just 2. Eli? Clara was beside him. She read the notice. Her hand went to her mouth. They didn't wait for the court, Eli said. His voice was hollow. Voss isn't waiting for the law. He bought the banknote. Clara looked out toward the creek. Eli, look, down by the water, in the fading light. There were men, 5 of them. They were driving stakes into the ground along the bank. They carried rifles slung over their backs. Surveyors, Eli said, spitting the word like poison. Voss's men. Clara grabbed his arm. They are taking the water. If they take the water, the land dies. I know, Eli said. He looked at the men. Then he looked at Clara. He saw the fear in her eyes, but he also saw the steel that had been forged in the line shack. She wasn't looking at the road to run away. She was looking at the enemy. My trouble, Clara said quietly. It has become your trouble. No, Eli said. He reached down and took her hand, interlacing his fingers with hers. It is our fight. He watched the men by the creek. The legal paper in his pocket felt very light against the weight of the rifles down by the water. They had proof of Rourke's corruption, but Voss had money. And out here, money was the only law that mattered until someone stood up and said no. Eli Mercer unlatched the door to his empty house, the foreclosure notice fluttering behind him. The dread was mounting, a cold tide rising in the dark, but he was not drowning alone. Not this time. The sound of wire snapping in the cold air was loud as a gunshot. Eli Mercer stood on his porch, his knuckles white where he gripped the railing. Down by the creek, 300 yards away, 2 men on horseback were working their way along his southern fence line. One of them leaned down with a pair of heavy cutters. Snap! The top strand of barbed wire coiled back like a struck snake. The men laughed. The sound carried on the wind, thin and sharp. Eli reached for the door handle, intending to go back inside for his rifle. The rage in his chest was a physical thing, a hot, expanding pressure that wanted to shatter bone. They were destroying his property in broad daylight. They were daring him to do something about it. No! Clara's voice came from behind him. She stepped out onto the porch, wrapping her shawl tight against the wind. She didn't look at the men. She looked at Eli. She saw the set of his jaw, the vein pulsing in his neck. They are waiting for you, Eli, she said. Her voice was steady, though he could see the tremor in her hands. Look at them. They aren't just cutting fence. They are watching the house. Eli looked. She was right. The men weren't working with the haste of vandals. They were moving with the arrogance of performers. One of them, a man in a yellow slicker, sat his horse facing the cabin, his hand resting conspicuously near his holster. They want you to shoot, Clara said. If you fire the first shot, you give Voss exactly what he needs. He will paint you as a madman and a danger to the public. Then the law can come and kill you, and everyone will say it was justice. Eli let out a breath that smoked in the freezing air. He released his grip on the railing. I cannot just watch them tear it down. We fight them with the paper, Clara said. We go to town. We file the affidavit from Mr. Dobbins. We force the clerk to record it. We make it so loud and official that they cannot sweep it away. Eli looked at her. She was terrified. He knew that. Every time she saw a rider, she flinched, but she was thinking clearer than he was. All right, Eli said. We go to town. The office of the county clerk in Granite Peak smelled of stale cigar smoke and dry paper. A pot-bellied stove hissed in the corner, but the room felt cold. Mr. Higgins, the clerk, was a small man with ink-stained fingers and a nervous habit of wiping his forehead with a handkerchief. He would not look Eli in the eye. I cannot locate the file. Mr. Mercer, Higgins said. shuffling a stack of papers that looked entirely irrelevant. The filing system is in a state of reorganization. The surveyor's report regarding the water rights has priority. My file was here last month, Eli said. He placed his heavy hands on the counter. And this is a sworn affidavit proving that the claim against my wife is fraudulent. I want it entered into the record. I am sure it is very important, Higgins stammered. He glanced toward the door, as if expecting Harlan Voss to walk in and strike him. But without the file number, and the sheriff is currently out on a circuit ride. The sheriff is at the saloon, Eli said flatly. I saw his horse. Mr. Mercer, please, Higgins whispered. Don't make trouble here. Rourke comes in every day to check the ledger. If I file that paper... He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. The silence spoke of the stranglehold Voss and his men had on the town. The law was not a shield. It was a weapon held by the highest bidder. Eli grabbed the affidavit off the counter. I will keep it, he said, until you find your spine. Higgins. They walked out into the gray afternoon light. The frustration was a bitter taste in Eli's mouth. He felt the walls closing in, not the walls of the canyon, but the invisible walls of a system designed to crush men like him. They walked toward the general store. Clara needed thread. It was a small thing, a domestic necessity, but she insisted on maintaining the rhythm of normal life. As they passed the livery stable, a group of men were loitering by the water trough. They stopped talking as Eli and Clara approached. Well, look at that, one man said. He was a drifter, new to town, with a face scarred by smallpox. That's the one Rourke is looking for, the runaway bride? Doesn't look like much, another man laughed. Looks a bit used up to me. Clara stiffened. She kept her eyes forward, her chin lifted. She was walking with the dignity of a queen to the gallows. A woman was sweeping the boardwalk in front of the millinery shop. As Clara passed, the woman stopped sweeping. She looked at Clara with a sneer of pure, self-righteous disgust. Trash, the woman hissed, and then she spat. The spittle landed on the hem of Clara's skirt, a wet, dark spot on the gray wool. Clara stopped. For a second, she wavered, as if she had been physically struck. The men by the trough laughed, a cruel, braying sound. Keep walking, Eli said. His voice was a low growl. He placed himself between Clara and the men, his hand hovering near his belt knife. Don't look at them. Clara moved her feet. She walked past the store, past the hotel, until they reached the back of the stable where their wagon was tied. The moment they were out of sight of the street, the string that held her upright cut. She collapsed against the rough wood of the stable wall. She didn't sob. She just slid down until she was crouching in the dirt, her hands covering her face. I cannot, she whispered. I cannot do this. They see me as dirt. No matter what I say, no matter what truth we have, I am just dirt to them. Eli knelt beside her. The anger he felt toward the town was eclipsed by the ache he felt for her. Clara, he said. She shook her head, hiding behind her hands. Used goods. That is what he called me. That is what I am. No, Eli said firmly. Look at me. She wouldn't. Eli didn't grab her hands. He didn't force her to look. He remembered the line shack. He remembered the fear. May I touch you? Eli asked softly. Clara went still. She took a shuddering breath. Slowly. She nodded. Eli reached out and placed his hand on her shoulder. He felt the tremors racking her body, as if the whole town and its cruelty had gotten inside her bones and was shaking her apart. He moved his hand to the back of her head, stroking her hair. You are not goods, Eli said. You are not something to be bought or sold or used. You are Clara. You are the woman who saved a calf on the ice. You are the woman who mended my coat. You are stronger than any of them. She lowered her hands. Her face was wet, her eyes red-rimmed and hollow. She leaned forward, pressing her forehead into the hollow of his shoulder. She let him take the weight of her for a moment. I want to go home, she whispered. I just want to go home. We are going, Eli said. Right now. He stood up and offered her his hand. She took it. They walked back toward the wagon. They had to cross the alley between the store and the bank to get to the main street. As they stepped out of the shadows, the trap sprung. "Hold it right there." It wasn't Rourke. It was one of Voss's men, a hired gun with a repeating rifle leveled at Eli's chest. Eli stopped, pushing Clara behind him instantly. "Don't move your hands, Mercer," the man said. "I am itching for a reason." From the other side of the alley, 3 men stepped out. Deputy Rourke was in the lead. He was smiling, but his eyes were cold and dead. "Elizabeth Darrow," Rourke said. He held up a pair of iron handcuffs. "Now you're under arrest." "On what charge?" Eli demanded. "We have proof." "Obstruction of justice," Rourke said smoothly. "And theft, and flight to avoid prosecution. And you, Mercer, you are under arrest for kidnapping." "Kidnapping?" Eli stared at him. "She is my wife." "Not according to the law," Rourke said. "According to the contract she signed with Mr. Thorne. She belongs in St. Louis. You took her. You held her against her will." "That is a lie," Clara screamed. She tried to step around Eli. "I went with him freely. I'm his wife." "Grab her," Rourke ordered. 2 men lunged. Eli moved. He couldn't help it. He knocked the barrel of the rifle aside and swung a heavy fist into the jaw of the gunman. The man went down, but there were too many of them. Something hard and heavy struck the back of Eli's head. The world exploded into white light and then gray spinning nausea. He fell to his knees. Through the ringing in his ears, he heard Clara screaming his name. "Eli! Eli!" He tried to stand. A boot kicked him hard in the ribs, knocking the wind out of him. "Stay down, plowboy," a voice growled. Eli looked up, vision swimming. He saw them dragging Clara toward a waiting carriage. She was fighting them, kicking and twisting, her bonnet falling into the mud. "Eli!" she screamed one last time, a sound of pure panic. Rourke shoved her into the carriage and slammed the door. He turned to the gunman standing over Eli. "If he follows," Rourke said, loud enough for Eli to hear, "shoot him. He is resisting arrest. It will be clean." The carriage rattled away, wheels churning the mud. Rourke mounted his horse and followed. Eli lay in the mud, the taste of blood in his mouth. He watched the carriage disappear around the corner. The helplessness washed over him, the same helplessness he had felt watching Mary die in the cold bed. "I failed." The thought was a hammer blow. Then, a colder, harder thought replaced it. Not this time. Eli pushed himself up. The world tilted, then righted itself. He wiped the blood from his mouth. He didn't go to the sheriff. He didn't go to the clerk. He went to his wagon, untied the gelding from the hitch, and cut the traces. He didn't need the wagon. He needed speed. He mounted the horse bareback, grabbed his rifle from the wagon bed, and turned the horse's head not toward the ranch, but toward the tracks the carriage had left in the mud. The tracks led north, not toward the jail, not toward the train station. They led toward the high country, toward the abandoned mining claims near Dead Man's Ridge. Rourke wasn't taking her to a cell. He was taking her somewhere where no one could hear her scream. The weather turned as Eli rode. The wind picked up, driving needles of sleet into his face. The sun began to set, bleeding a bruised purple across the western sky. Eli tracked them. He was not a scout, but the carriage left a deep scar in the earth. He rode with a singular, terrifying focus. The fear was there, a cold knot in his stomach, but he packed it down deep, using it as fuel. The terrain grew rough. The carriage had abandoned the road, heading up a logging trace that hadn't been used in 10 years. Eli's horse stumbled on a patch of loose shale. Eli patted the animal's neck. "Easy," he murmured. "Easy now." He crested a rise and saw movement in the valley below. Smoke, a thin gray wisp rising from a clump of spruce trees. There was a shack down there, an old trapper's cabin. Eli pulled the horse back behind the ridge. He slid to the ground. He couldn't ride in. They would see him coming for a mile. He tied the horse in a stand of aspen. He checked his rifle. 7 rounds. He had a knife in his belt. He started down the slope on foot, moving from rock to tree, a shadow moving through shadows. Halfway down, a voice spoke from the brush to his left. "You walk loud for a man trying to sneak up on a wolf." Eli spun, Raising the rifle, a man stepped out from behind a boulder. He held a Winchester aimed at the ground, but his thumb was on the hammer. He was dark-skinned, wearing a heavy sheepskin coat and a wide-brimmed hat. It was Isaac Washington, the freeman who ran cattle on the difficult land east of the ridge. Beside him stood a younger man, slight and wiry, Mateo Rivera. "Isaac," Eli breathed, lowering the rifle slightly. "Get out of my way. They have Clara." "We know," Isaac said. "We saw the carriage pass, Rourke and 3 others. They are at the trapper's shack." "Why are you here?" Eli asked. "Because Rourke cut my fence last week," Isaac said. "And because Voss tried to buy Mateo's water for $1. Isaac spat on the ground. "We are tired of bad men holding all the cards. Mercer, I am going in," Eli said. "If you go in the front, they will kill you before you clear the trees," Mateo said. His English was accented but precise. "And they will use the girl as a shield." "I have to get her out," Eli said. His voice cracked. "I cannot leave her with him." "We know the ground," Isaac said. "Mateo can circle round the back. The wind is blowing that way. The horses won't smell him. I can set a fire in the brush to the east. Draw their eyes." Eli looked at them. These were men he had nodded to in town, traded few words with. They owed him nothing. But out here, the enemy of your enemy was your brother. "Why?" Eli asked again. "Because today it is your wife," Isaac said grimly. "Tomorrow it is my daughter. We help you, Mercer, but we do it quiet. No war, just extraction." "Extraction," Eli agreed. Inside the shack, it was cold. There was no fire in the grate. Rourke sat on a crate, cleaning his fingernails with a small knife. Clara sat on the floor in the corner, her wrists bound in front of her with rope. Her bonnet was gone, her hair wild. There was a bruise blooming on her cheekbone where one of the men had gripped her face. "You are making this difficult, Elizabeth," Rourke said. "Mr. Thorne is a forgiving man, but I am less so." "My name is Clara," she said. Her voice was shaking, but she spoke clearly. "And you are not a lawman. You are a pimp with a badge." Rourke stood up, his face darkened. He walked over to her and backhanded her across the mouth. Clara's head snapped back. She tasted blood. She didn't cry out. She glared at him. "Hit me again," she hissed. "It makes it easier for the judge to see what you are." "There will be no judge," Rourke said softly. "By the time we get back to St. Louis, you will be so quiet, no one will even know you are there. And Mercer will be dead. Resisting arrest, a tragedy." He reached down and grabbed the front of her dress, pulling her up. "Now, let's see if you remember your place." Clara spat in his face. Rourke roared, raising his hand. Outside, a sudden, bright flare lit up the window. A whoosh of sound, like a giant inhaling. "Fire!" one of the guards shouted from outside. "The brush is on fire!" Rourke froze. He dropped Clara and ran to the window. "What in the hell? The horses are spooking!" another man yelled. The sound of terrified whinnies and stamping hooves filled the air. The guards were running toward the picket line, distracted by the sudden orange glow rising to the east. Clara scrambled backward, looking for a weapon, a piece of wood, a rock, anything. The door behind Rourke opened. It didn't burst open. It opened silently. Eli Mercer stepped in. He didn't have the rifle. It was too tight in the room. He had the knife. Rourke turned. Sensing the movement, he went for his gun. Eli didn't hesitate. He slammed into Rourke, driving him back against the wall. The impact knocked the wind out of the deputy. Eli grabbed Rourke's gun hand, twisting the wrist with the strength of a man who wrestled steers. There was a sickening pop. Rourke screamed, dropping the revolver. Eli drove his knee into Rourke's stomach, then slammed his forehead into the bridge of Rourke's nose. It was brutal, efficient violence. Rourke crumpled to the floor, moaning. Eli didn't finish him. He didn't have time. He turned to Clara. "Come," he said. He pulled her up. He slashed the ropes on her wrists with one stroke of his knife. "Eli," she sobbed. "Run," he said. "Now!" They bolted out the door. The guards were 50 yards away, beating at the burning brush with blankets, shouting at the horses. "Over here!" a voice hissed. Mateo was waiting in the shadows of the spruce trees with 2 horses, Eli's and one of the deputy's mounts that he had cut loose. "Go!" Mateo whispered. "Up the creek bed. The ice will hide your tracks." "Thank you," Eli gasped. "Ride!" Mateo slapped the rump of Eli's horse. They scrambled into the saddles and spurred the horses into the darkness. Behind them, a shot rang out, a warning shot into the air, or a shot of frustration. It didn't matter. The snow swallowed the sound. They rode hard for an hour, the horses slipping and sliding on the frozen ground. Eli led them up a narrow ravine that cut deep into the mountain, a place of shadows and silence where the wind couldn't reach, only when they were miles away, hidden in the throat of the canyon. Did Eli pull up? He slid off his horse and nearly collapsed. His legs were shaking uncontrollably. It wasn't the cold. It was the adrenaline crash, the terror of the last 4 hours draining out of him. Clara practically fell from her saddle. She stumbled toward him. "Eli," she said. Her voice was a broken thing. "I have you?" Eli said. He caught her. "I have you?" She pressed her hand flat against his chest, right over his heart. She pushed hard, as if she needed to verify that he was solid, that he was warm, that he wasn't a hallucination born of fear. "You came," she said. "You came into the dark." "I will always come," Eli said. He wrapped his arms around her, burying his face in her hair. He was shaking too, vibrating with a rage he had barely controlled. He wanted to go back and kill Rourke. He wanted to burn the town down. "You are safe," he murmured. "You are not alone anymore." Clara looked up at him. The moonlight filtered down into the ravine, lighting her face. Her lip was split. Her cheek was swelling, but her eyes were fierce. She reached up and pulled his head down. She kissed him. It wasn't like the kiss in the loft. That had been tentative. A question. This was an answer. It was fierce with survival. It tasted of blood and salt tears and the desperate, clawing need to be alive. Eli groaned, a sound torn from his chest. He kissed her back, his hands tangling in her hair, pulling her closer until there was no air between them. The cold of the winter night vanished, replaced by a searing heat. They sank down onto the frozen moss of the ravine bank. Eli's hands moved over the rough wool of her coat, finding the shape of her. Clara's hands were in his coat, clutching his shirt, pulling him down. They were on the edge, the precipice of something that could consume them both. Then Clara paused. She pulled back just an inch. Her breath was coming in ragged gasps. She looked at him, her eyes searching his face. "Wait," she whispered. Eli froze. "Yes, I stop." "No," Clara said. "Not stop, just wait." She closed her eyes for a second. She took a breath. She was asking herself what she wanted. Was this fear? Was this just the adrenaline seeking release? Or was this her choice? She opened her eyes. They were clear. "I want to be close," she said. "But not like this. Not in the dirt. Not while we are running." She chose dignity. She chose to save the act for a moment of peace, not a moment of war. "Okay," Eli said. He kissed her forehead. He sat up and pulled her into his lap, wrapping his heavy coat around both of them. "We wait." They sat there in the ravine, holding each other while the horses blew steam in the darkness. But the peace was an illusion. Miles back, at the line shack, Deputy Rourke was stumbling to his feet. His nose was broken, blood streaming down his face. He picked up his revolver with his left hand. Voss's foreman rode into the clearing, looking at the bruised deputy. "He got away," the foreman said, disgusted. "No," Rourke said. His voice was thick with blood and hate. "He didn't get away. He just dug his own grave." Rourke spat a tooth onto the floor. "He attacked a lawman," Rourke said. "He broke a prisoner out of custody. That is a hanging offense." "We need more men," the foreman said. "We will get him," Rourke said. "We go back to town. We tell them Mercer has gone mad. We tell them he kidnapped the girl to silence her. We get a warrant from the judge himself." Rourke looked up at the foreman, his eyes burning with a cold, psychotic light. "Round up every man who can hold a rifle," Rourke said. "We are going to hunt him down. And this time, we bring the paper that makes it legal to kill him." The ravine offered shelter from the wind, but it could not hide them from the truth. They sat huddled under the lip of the rock, the horses shivering in the darkness, while Eli Mercer made a decision that would change the shape of his life. "We do not run," Eli said. His voice was rough, scraping against the silence of the canyon. "If we run, we are what they say we are. Fugitives, thieves." Clara looked at him. The bruise on her cheek was darkening in the moonlight, a violet stain on her pale skin. "If we stay, they will hang you." "No," Eli said. "We don't stay here, and we don't run away. We go to Iron Ridge." Iron Ridge was the county seat, a sprawling town of brick and iron 50 miles to the south. It had a courthouse. It had a judge who was not on Harlan Voss's payroll. It was a terrifying distance to travel in winter with a posse gathering behind them, but it was the only place where the paper Eli carried in his pocket might weigh more than a bullet. "We fight them," Eli said, reaching out to touch Clara's hand where it rested on her knee. "We take every scrap of paper, the ledger Dobbins gave us, your testimony, and we shove it down their throats in open court." They rode out before dawn. The journey was a punishment. The weather had turned from snow to a freezing, driving rain that turned the trails into sucking quagmires of mud. The rivers were swollen, brown and angry, tearing at their banks. At the crossing of the Snake River, Eli's horse lost its footing, nearly plunging them both into the torrent. They scrambled up the muddy bank, soaked to the bone, shivering violently, but they did not stop. They slept in thickets and abandoned barns, eating cold biscuits and keeping watch in shifts. Every rider on the horizon was a threat. Every snapping twig was a gun cocking. But as they rode, they gathered strength. Not physical strength. They were exhausted, hollow-eyed, and gaunt, but the strength of purpose. They stopped at the Freeman Ranch of Isaac Washington. Isaac gave them fresh horses and a letter he had written, detailing the night Rourke cut his fences. "Take it," Isaac said, pressing the paper into Eli's hand. "The law doesn't like to listen to men like me, but paper has a way of shouting." Iron Ridge was a shock to the senses. It was loud, smelling of coal smoke and unwashed humanity. There were gas lamps on the main street and buildings made of red brick that rose 3 stories high. Eli led the horses down the main thoroughfare, Clara riding beside him. She felt small, in the wilderness. Her worn wool coat and heavy boots were tools of survival. Here, among women in silk bustles and men in tailored suits, she looked like a beggar. She saw the way people looked at her. A group of men outside a saloon stopped talking as they passed, their eyes tracking her with a mixture of curiosity and disdain. They saw the mud on her hem, the wildness of her hair, the bruise on her face. They whispered, "That's the one, the runaway, the thief." Clara shrank inside her coat. The shame was a cold stone in her gut. She had spent her life trying to be invisible, trying to be respectable so men wouldn't hurt her. And now she was a spectacle. "Head up," Eli said softly. He didn't look at the crowd. He looked straight ahead. "You have done nothing wrong." They went to the office of Samuel Abernathy, a lawyer, Mrs. Kit had told them about. His office was a dusty, cramped room above a feed store, smelling of old leather and pipe tobacco. Abernathy was a man who looked like he had been dried out by the wind. He was thin, with spectacles that sat crooked on his nose. He listened to their story without interrupting, his pen scratching across a piece of paper. When Eli finished, Abernathy leaned back. "It is a compelling story, Mr. Mercer, but Harlan Voss owns half this county, and Deputy Rourke wears a badge. You are asking a judge to believe a drifter and a woman with a complicated past over a pillar of the community." "We have the ledger," Eli said, slamming the book down on the desk. "It shows the debt transfer. It shows Rourke bought the debt to coerce her." "Circumstantial," Abernathy said. They will argue it was a standard business transaction. There was a knock at the door. Eli tensed, his hand going to his belt. Abernathy looked annoyed. "Come in." The door opened. A woman stepped in, shaking rain from a heavy oilskin cloak. It was Mrs. Kit. She looked tired, her face lined with the dust of the road, but her eyes were bright and hard. Behind her stood Mateo Rivera, who had guided her through the back trails to beat the weather. "I heard you were looking for ammunition," Mrs. Kit said. She reached into her reticule and pulled out a packet of letters tied with blue ribbon. "Mrs. Kit," Clara breathed, standing up. "Sit down, child." "Mrs." Kit said briskly. She turned to the lawyer. "You are Abernathy? Good. Read this." She slapped the letters onto the desk. "That is from Sarah Hale." "Mrs." Kit said. "The sister, the original bride. She wrote to me 3 months ago before she vanished. She details exactly what Rourke said to her. He told her if she didn't service him, he would see her stepfather jailed. She didn't run off with a lover, Mr. Abernathy. She ran for her life." Abernathy picked up the letters. He read in silence. His eyebrows went up. "This name's Rourke," Abernathy said, "explicitly. And it establishes a pattern. He didn't just want a wife. He was hunting vulnerable women to settle debts." He looked up at Eli and Clara. The reluctance was gone from his face, replaced by the sharp, hungry look of a predator who has just found a scent. "This is admissible," Abernathy said. "We can file for an emergency injunction against the foreclosure. We can force a hearing." The hearing was set for 2 days later. The courtroom was not the grand hall of justice Eli had imagined. It was a small, wood-paneled room heated by a roaring stove. Judge Holloway sat behind a high desk, a man with a beard like a snowdrift and eyes that had seen too many lies. Voss was there. He sat on the front bench, wearing a suit that cost more than Eli's ranch. He looked bored. Rourke stood by the wall, his nose bandaged, his arm in a sling where Eli had twisted it. He stared at Clara with a hatred so pure it felt like heat. Abernathy presented the evidence, the ledger, the letters, the testimony of Isaac Washington regarding the fence cutting. Then he called Clara. "Mrs. Mercer," Abernathy said, "please tell the court why you left St. Louis." Clara stood. Her legs felt like water. The room was full of men. Men with power. Men with opinions. She could feel Rourke's eyes on her skin, dirty and claiming. She looked at Eli. He was sitting at the plaintiff's table. He didn't nod. He didn't smile. He just watched her with a steady, anchoring gravity. "I will stand beside you," he had said. "I will not speak over you." Clara took a breath. "I did not leave because I wanted to," Clara said. Her voice was quiet, but it did not shake. "I left because I was sold." A murmur went through the room. "Mr. Thorne held my stepfather's debt," Clara continued. "He told me I was the payment. I refused. He locked me in a cellar for 3 days. When I agreed to sign the contract, it was not consent. It was surrender." She turned to look at Rourke. "And when I came here, Deputy Rourke told me the debt was now his. He told me I belonged to him. He did not ask for my hand. He asked for my submission." "Objection!" Voss's lawyer shouted. "This is slander against an officer of the law." "Overruled." Judge Holloway rumbled. "Sit down." "I am not a thief," Clara said, her voice rising just a fraction. "I took $4 to pay for a coach ticket. I ran to save my own life. And Eli Mercer, he is the only man who has ever asked for my permission before he touched me." She sat down. She was trembling now, a fine vibration that rattled her teeth. She felt exposed, flayed open for these strangers to judge. Eli reached out under the table. He laid his hand palm up on his thigh. He didn't grab her. He waited. Clara reached out and gripped his hand. She held on as if he were the only solid thing in a spinning world. The intimacy of it, the choice of it, was louder than any shout. The court recessed for an hour while the judge reviewed the documents. Eli and Clara stepped out into the hallway. The air was cooler there. Harlan Voss was waiting for them. He leaned against the wall, smoking a cigar. He looked at Eli with a look of mild appraisal. "You put on a good show." "Mercer," Voss said. "Emotional. The ladies will like it." "It is the truth," Eli said. "Truth is expensive," Voss said. He flicked ash onto the floor. "I have a proposition. I will clear your debt at the bank, all of it. I will even give you $500 for your trouble. You sign the water rights over to me. You annul this marriage. You walk away." Eli looked at the man. He thought about the debt letters pinned under the tin cup. He thought about the cold nights and the fear. $500 was a fortune. Then he looked at Clara. "She is my wife," Eli said. "She is a liability," Voss said. "Rourke wants her back. You give her to him, and you keep your land. It is a simple trade. Property for property." The rage that had been simmering in Eli for months finally boiled over. It wasn't the hot, blinding rage of the fight. It was cold. It was granite. "She is not currency!" Eli's voice boomed down the hallway. Heads turned. "She is not a head of cattle you can barter for. You think you can buy everything. Voss, you think because you have money, you can buy a human being. Keep your voice down," Voss snapped. "No," Eli said. "I want them to hear. I want them to know that you are not a businessman. You are a flesh peddler." Voss's face went purple. He signaled to a man standing by the door, a large, broken-nosed man known only as the drover. "Teach him manners," Voss hissed. The drover didn't hesitate. He lunged at Eli. It happened fast. The drover threw a heavy, looping punch that caught Eli in the ribs. Eli grunted, the pain flaring white-hot. But Eli was not a brawler. He was a worker. He had wrestled stubborn mules and held up collapsing beams. He absorbed the blow and stepped in. He grabbed the man's lapels and slammed him backward into the wall. The plaster cracked. The drover tried to knee him, but Eli twisted, driving his fist into the man's stomach. It was a short, brutal punch, powered by months of frustration. The drover doubled over. Eli grabbed the man by the neck and the belt and threw him. The man skidded across the floor, crashing into a bench. Eli stood there, chest heaving. Blood was trickling from a cut above his eye where the man's ring had caught him. His ribs felt like they were on fire. He looked at the man on the floor, and for a second, he wanted to kill him. He wanted to stomp him until he stopped moving, until all the threat was gone. "Eli!" Clara's voice cut through the red haze. He looked at her. She was standing by the wall, her eyes wide, not with fear of him, with fear for him. Eli lowered his hands. He took a breath. He stepped back. "I am done," Eli said to Voss. "Stay away from me." Clara ran to him. She saw the blood running down his face. "You are bleeding. Oh God, Eli, you are bleeding because of me." She reached for him, her hands hovering over the cut. "It is my fault. I brought this to you." Eli caught her wrists. "Clara, look at me." She looked. Her eyes were swimming with guilt. "No," Clara said suddenly. Her face changed. The guilt evaporated, replaced by a flash of hard, bright anger. She turned to look at Voss, who was backing away. "No, it is not my fault. It is his." She pointed a shaking finger at Voss. "He did this. He chose violence. I will not carry his sin." It was the moment the chain broke. She refused the shame. Judge Holloway returned to the bench 20 minutes later. The courtroom was silent. The judge looked at Rourke, then at Voss, then at the pile of letters. "The authority of the law," Judge Holloway said, his voice heavy, "relies on the presumption that those who enforce it are not criminals themselves." He picked up his gavel. "I am granting a temporary injunction against the foreclosure of the Mercer property. The water rights remain with Mr. Mercer until a full survey can be conducted by the state." He turned his eyes to Rourke. "Deputy Rourke, in light of these sworn affidavits, you are hereby suspended from duty pending a federal inquiry into extortion and abuse of power. You will surrender your badge to the bailiff immediately." Rourke went still. His face was a mask of disbelief. He reached up slowly and unpinned the silver star. He dropped it on the table. It made a hollow, tinny sound. "This is a mistake," Rourke said quietly. "The mistake was yours." The judge said, "Court is adjourned." It was not a total victory. Voss was still rich. Rourke was still free. But it was a wedge in the door. It was breathing room. They rented a room at the boarding house on Elm Street. It was small, with wallpaper peeling in the corners. But it had a lock on the door and a fire in the grate. Outside, the rain had turned to a soft, steady drizzle. Eli sat on the edge of the bed, his shirt off. His torso was a map of bruises. The cut over his eye was throbbing. Clara stood between his knees, a basin of warm water and a cloth on the nightstand. She wrung out the cloth. "This will sting," she said. "I know," Eli said. She dabbed the cloth against his forehead. He flinched, his muscles jumping under his skin. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "It is fine," Eli said. He watched her face. She was so close. Her eyes were focused on the wound, her breath warm on his skin. The adrenaline of the fight had faded, leaving behind a raw, aching exhaustion. But beneath the exhaustion, something else was rising. It was the same heat they had felt in the ravine, but stripped of the panic. Clara finished cleaning the cut. She put the cloth down. She didn't move away. She looked at his chest, at the heavy muscles of his shoulders, at the scars on his hands. She looked up at his eyes. "You fought for me," she said. "I will always fight for you." Eli said, "I don't need you to fight right now." Clara said, her voice dropped to a whisper, "I need you to be here." She placed her hands on his bare shoulders. Her fingers were cool. Eli's breath caught. "Clara, are you sure?" "I am not afraid," she said. "Not of you. Not anymore." She leaned in and kissed him. It was slow. It was deliberate. It was a question and an answer all at once. Eli wrapped his arms around her waist, pulling her closer. He felt the warmth of her through the fabric of her dress. He felt the beat of her heart against his chest. "I want this," she whispered against his lips. "I choose this." The words broke the last of his restraint. He kissed her back, deep and hungry. He laid her back on the bed, the mattress creaking under their weight. The night that followed was not like the nights in the line shack. There was no wall between them. There were shadows. Yes, the shadows of their pasts, the scars they both carried. But they navigated them together. It was a clumsy, tender, desperate thing. There were moments where Clara stiffened, a reflex of old fear, and Eli would stop instantly, his hand hovering, waiting until she breathed out and pulled him back. There were whispers in the dark, assurances, names, the simple confession of need, for two wounded people. Joy was a difficult thing to trust, but as the rain fell outside and the fire died down to embers, they found it. They found a way to be naked without being vulnerable, to be possessed without being owned. While Eli and Clara slept, wrapped in each other's arms, the city of Iron Ridge was quiet, but in the alley behind the courthouse, a horse was being saddled. Deputy Rourke stood in the mud. He was not wearing his badge. He was wearing a long duster coat and a hat pulled low. The bailiff, who was supposed to be guarding him, lay in the straw of the stable, unconscious, a lump rising on the back of his head. Rourke checked the cylinder of his revolver. 6 rounds. He slid it into his holster. He was humiliated. He had been stripped of his power by a man who dug dirt for a living and a woman he had bought and paid for. The judge thought a piece of paper could stop him. The judge was a fool. Rourke swung into the saddle. He didn't look back at the town. He turned his horse north, toward Mercer Creek. He was done with the law. The law had failed him. Now, there was only the older, darker law of the frontier. Blood for blood. He rode hard, the mud flying from his horse's hooves, riding toward a vengeance that would burn the valley to ash. The return to Mercer Creek was not a homecoming. It was an arrival at a crime scene. The thaw had set in with a vengeance. The world was a slurry of gray mud and melting ice, the creek swollen and roaring against its banks, churning with the brown runoff of the high peaks. The air smelled of wet earth and pine resin, but beneath it lay a sweeter, fouler scent. Eli pulled his horse up at the edge of the yard, beside him. Clara sat on her mare, her face pale within the hood of her cloak. The devastation was not total, but it was precise. It was the work of men who knew exactly how to hurt a rancher. The corral fence lay in splinters, the posts sawed through at the base. The gate hung by a single leather hinge, creaking in the damp wind. But it was the trough that made Eli's stomach turn. He dismounted, his boots sinking inches into the mire, and walked to the water tank near the barn. A greenish film coated the surface of the water. Floating in it were 2 dead magpies, their feathers slick and matted. "Arsenic," Eli said, his voice flat, "or rat poison." Clara walked up beside him. She looked at the dead birds. She did not look away. "They wanted to kill the horses," she said. "They wanted to kill the spirit." Eli corrected. "This is Rourke. Voss cuts fences. Rourke poisons the well." He looked out over the pasture. The cattle were gone, scattered into the deep ravines of the foothills, likely spooked by gunfire or dogs. It would take weeks to gather them. And in this mud, many would have broken legs or mired down to die of exposure. It was a ruin. It was a message. Leave or die. Eli felt the old, dark weight pressing down on his shoulders, the memory of the winter he had failed his first wife, the crushing burden of being one man against a merciless land. He looked at the house, standing silent and dark. Then he felt a hand on his arm. "We have work to do," Clara said. He turned to her. She was not crying. She was not trembling. Her jaw was set in a line of iron that reminded him of the granite ridges above them. "Clara," Eli said, "this is dangerous. They are not done." "I know," she said. She walked past him toward the barn, grabbing a shovel that leaned against the wall. "But this is my home, and I'm tired of letting bad men decide where I sleep." She drove the shovel into the mud, beginning the work of clearing the drainage ditch. It was a small act, but it was a declaration of war. The next 3 days were a brutal test of endurance. The landscape fought them as hard as their enemies. The spring storms rolled off the mountains in waves of freezing rain, turning the valley into a swamp. But they were not alone. On the second morning, a wagon creaked up the road. It was Isaac Washington, driving a team of heavy draft horses, with Mateo Rivera riding alongside. "Heard there was a storm coming," Isaac said, climbing down. He looked at the cut fences. "Figured you might need some extra hammers." Mateo didn't say anything. He just unslung his rifle, leaned it against the porch rail where he could reach it, and picked up a post hole digger. By noon, Mrs. Kit had arrived, riding a mule that looked as stubborn as she was. She brought a basket of dried apples and a shotgun wrapped in an oilcloth. "I am too old to dig," Mrs. Kit announced, setting up a camp stove on the porch. "But I can cook, and I can shoot anything that moves and doesn't know the password." Even Henderson, the storekeeper who had refused them flour, arrived late in the afternoon. He walked all the way from town, leading a donkey loaded with sacks of grain. He wouldn't look Eli in the eye. "Voss raised the rent again," Henderson muttered, unloading the sacks. "And I didn't like the way I felt, sleeping at night, knowing I let a neighbor starve." "You are welcome here." "Henderson," Eli said. He offered his hand. Henderson took it, his grip shaking with shame and gratitude. They worked. They drained the poisoned trough and scrubbed it with lye. They rounded up the straggling cattle. They repaired the fence line, stringing new wire that sang in the wind. Clara did not hide. When riders passed on the ridge, Voss's men, watching, counting, she did not go inside. She stood on the porch, wiping her hands on her apron, and watched them back. She let them see her face. She let them see that she was not a ghost, and she was not a victim. She was the lady of the house, and she was standing her ground. The final showdown did not happen in the dark. It happened at noon, under a sky the color of a bruised plum. They heard the horses first, a low rumble that vibrated through the mud. Eli was in the yard, repairing the gate hinge. He stopped. He stood up slowly, wiping his hands on his trousers. "Isaac," Eli said calmly. "Get inside." "I will stand with you," Isaac said. "No," Eli said. "This is the law, or what passes for it. If you fight, they will hang you for insurrection. Let me handle the paper." Isaac hesitated, then nodded. He motioned for Mateo and Henderson to retreat into the barn. They went, but Eli saw the glint of rifle barrels in the hayloft. The riders crested the hill. There were 8 of them. Harlan Voss's foreman, a man named Miller, rode on the left, but he was not leading. Deputy Rourke was in the lead. He looked like a man who had walked through hell and brought the fire back with him. He wore no badge. His coat was torn, his hat stained with sweat and grease. His nose was a swollen, purple ruin where Eli had broken it, and his eyes were bloodshot and frantic. He did not ride like a lawman. He rode like a mad dog. They pulled up 10 yards from the gate. The horses stamped in the mud, their breath pluming in the cold air. "Mercer!" Rourke screamed. His voice was a cracked, high-pitched thing. "Bring her out." Eli walked to the center of the yard. He did not wear a gun belt. He held a piece of paper in his hand, the injunction Judge Halloway had signed. "You are trespassing, Rourke," Eli said. His voice was steady, resonant, carrying over the sound of the wind. "I have a court order. This land is protected, and you are suspended from duty." Rourke laughed. It was a wet, ugly sound. He pulled a revolver from his holster. "You think I care about a piece of paper?" Rourke shouted. "The judge isn't here. Plowboy. There is no one here but us. You attacked an officer. You kidnapped a fugitive. I am the law." "You are nothing," a voice said. Clara stepped out onto the porch. She wore her gray dress, clean and pressed. Her hair was pulled back. She held nothing in her hands. She walked down the steps and into the mud, moving toward Eli. "Clara, go back," Eli hissed. "No," she said. She stopped beside him. She looked up at Rourke. "You are not the law," Clara said, her voice ringing clear. "And you are not a man. You are a coward who hides behind a badge to steal what he cannot earn. You hurt women because it makes you feel tall, but you look very small from here. Mr. Rourke." The silence that followed was absolute. The men behind Rourke shifted in their saddles. They were hired guns, hard men. But there was something in Clara's voice, a cold, absolute truth, that shamed them. Rourke's face twisted. The veins in his neck bulged. The truth struck him harder than Eli's fist ever had. It stripped away the myth he had built around himself. "I will kill you," Rourke whispered. He raised the gun, aiming it at Clara's chest. "Drop it!" The command came from the road behind them. Rourke spun in his saddle. A lone rider sat on a gray stallion at the top of the rise. He wore a long duster and a flat-brimmed hat. On his chest, catching the meager light, was a U.S. Marshal's badge. "Marshal Davis," the rider called out. "I suggest you lower that weapon, Mr. Rourke, unless you want to die in a muddy field for a crime that is already over." It was the timing of justice. Slow, grinding, but arriving at last. The lawyer, Abernathy, had sent the telegram days ago. Miller, Voss's foreman, looked at the marshal, then at Rourke. He was a mercenary, not a zealot. "I'm out," Miller said. He holstered his gun and backed his horse away. "I didn't sign up for federal trouble." "Cowards!" Rourke screamed. "All of you!" He turned back to Eli and Clara. The madness had taken him completely. He didn't see the marshal. He didn't see the odds. He only saw the woman who had defied him and the man who had humiliated him. "She is mine!" Rourke roared. He cocked the hammer. Eli moved. He didn't dive for cover. He stepped in front of Clara, shielding her body with his own. He stood tall, offering his chest to the bullet, refusing to run, refusing to bow. Rourke fired. The shot went wide, kicking up a spray of mud near Eli's boot, because Rourke's hand was shaking with rage before he could cock the weapon again. A boom echoed from the barn loft. Mateo Rivera had fired a warning shot from his rifle, putting a bullet through the brim of Rourke's hat. Rourke flinched, his horse rearing violently. The revolver flew from his hand, landing in the muck. The horse, terrified, bucked hard. Throwing Rourke from the saddle, he hit the ground with a wet thud. He tried to scramble for the gun, crawling on his hands and knees, screaming incoherent curses. "That is enough." The marshal was there. He rode his horse between Rourke and the gun. He leaned down, leveling a Winchester at Rourke's head. "Touch that iron, son, and you won't have a head left to worry about." Rourke froze. He looked up at the marshal, then at Eli, then at Clara. He lay in the mud, stripped of his badge, his gun, and his dignity. He was just a man in the dirt. Clara looked at him. She felt no triumph. She felt only a profound exhaustion, and the sudden, light sensation of a weight vanishing. "Take him," Clara said softly. The marshal dismounted and hauled Rourke to his feet, slapping iron cuffs on his wrists. "Harlan Voss will hear of this," Rourke spat, blood dripping from his mouth. "Harlan Voss is currently explaining his bookkeeping to a federal circuit judge in Iron Ridge," the marshal said dryly. "He won't be hearing anything for a long time." The victory did not end with a parade. It ended with quiet. The marshal took Rourke away. The hired men dispersed like smoke. The neighbors, Isaac, Mateo, Mrs., Kit, packed up their tools and went home to their own lives, leaving Eli and Clara alone in the yard. It tasted like exhaustion. Eli sat on the porch steps, his head in his hands. The adrenaline was leaving his body, leaving him shaking. Clara sat beside him. She reached out and took his hand. His knuckles were white, his skin cold. "It is over," she said. "Is it?" Eli asked, looking at the gray sky. "The fear is over," Clara said. "The work is just starting." In the weeks that followed, the town of Granite Peak did not magically transform. There were still people who crossed the street to avoid Clara. There were still whispers in the church pews about her past, about the scandal of the trial. Prejudice was a weed with deep roots. It did not die overnight, but the silence was broken. Henderson kept the store open to them. The blacksmith, a man who had never spoken much, tipped his hat to Clara when she walked by. Mrs. Kit invited Clara to the sewing circle, and when Gable tried to object. "Mrs." Kit simply said, "You can leave if your righteousness is too heavy to carry." Martha, Mrs. Gable stayed. It was a glimmer, a slow, stubborn thaw. At the ranch, the healing was measured in labor. Eli and Clara rebuilt the fence. They worked side by side, stretching the wire, driving the staples. They planted a garden in the plot, Mrs. Kit had helped clear hardy vegetables that could survive the frost. Turnips, potatoes, kale. The domestic intimacy grew out of the silence. It wasn't the desperate clinging of the winter months. It was steady. It was Eli waking up before dawn to stoke the fire so the room would be warm when Clara rose. It was Clara learning that Eli liked his coffee black, but his biscuits sweet. It was the way they learned to ask. One evening, by the fire, Eli watched Clara brushing her hair. The light caught the silver in the brush. "May I?" Eli asked. He didn't reach. He asked. Clara stopped. She turned to him, smiling. "Yes." He took the brush. He moved behind her, pulling the bristles through her dark hair with long, rhythmic strokes. It was a simple act, but it felt like a sacrament. It was an act of service, not ownership. "You have a gray hair," Eli noted. "I earned it." Clara laughed. It was a real laugh, deep and throaty. "We both did," Eli said. He put the brush down and rested his hands on her shoulders. He leaned down and kissed the top of her head. "I love you, Clara." She closed her eyes, leaning back against him. "I know, and I trust you." "Eli, which is a bigger thing. I think—" "Yes," he said. "It is." The final act of the past happened on a Sunday. Clara brought a small wooden box out to the yard. Inside were the papers she had carried from St. Louis, the false contract, the letters from her stepfather, the threatening notes Rourke had sent. She built a small fire in the fire pit near the creek. Eli stood back, leaning against a cottonwood tree. He knew this was something she had to do alone. Clara took the papers out one by one. She read them, acknowledging the pain they had caused, the fear they had carried. Then, she fed them to the flames. She watched the paper curl and blacken. She watched the ink, the words debt and obey and property, turn to ash and float up into the clear spring air. "It is gone," she whispered. "I am not that story anymore." She turned to Eli. He was watching her with a look of such profound pride it made her chest ache. "What now?" Eli asked. "Now," Clara said, "we write the next part." The storm had passed in the night, leaving the valley scrubbed clean. The sun broke over the eastern peaks of the Rockies, a blinding golden light that set the wet sagebrush glittering like diamonds. The creek was running clear again, the poison washed away, the water singing over the stones. Eli and Clara stood by the bank of Mercer Creek. The willows were putting out new green shoots. The air smelled of mud and growth and impossible hope. Eli reached out his hand. He didn't grab, he opened his palm. Clara placed her hand in his. Her fingers were rougher now, calloused from the hoe and the needle, stained with the earth of their land. They were the hands of a woman who worked, who fought, and who stayed. Eli's hand closed around hers, warm and solid. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. They stood together, shoulder to shoulder, looking out at the wide, open country. It was a hard land. It would try to freeze them, starve them, and break them. But they were no longer just surviving it. They were living in it. Their love was not a sudden miracle. It was the fence post set deep against the wind. It was the wood chopped before the snow. It was a stubborn, quiet decision made every single day. To listen, to respect, and to stand together when the world insisted they should fall. It was hard-won. It was tender. And for the first time in both their lives, it was free. Thank you for journeying with me through the high country of the 1880s to witness the story of Eli and Clara. It has been a privilege to share this tale of resilience and love with you. I would love to hear from you. Please leave a comment below telling me where you are listening from in the world. If this story touched you, consider subscribing to From Wild West for more tales of the frontier. Please share your thoughts and feelings about the ending in English. I read every comment and cherish your connection to these characters. Until the next campfire, travel safely.